Let's talk about 6 tips for personal branding for women. Grab your cup of tea and let's dive into it. I often see a lot of coaches and consultants encourage their clients in personal branding to embrace being a woman as a core part of the identity of their personal brand. I know that there are a lot of people that are particularly really passionate about this, and I know that this approach works really well for some people, and in some instances it is actually really relevant. I have worked in different female dominated industries where the actual product or the service that is being offered to the customer is specifically for women. So it makes sense that the marketing and the personal branding is really celebrating that aspect of the brand. But in what might be a potentially unpopular opinion for a lot of people, I would argue that for the majority, this may not be the case. And embracing different aspects of your work might have more value when it comes to core aspects of your personal brand. So for this episode, what I want to talk about is how we can increase our awareness of how being a woman affects our work and some of the things that we could do differently or the opportunities that we have to excel in our career as a woman. When you think about this on the world stage, an example that comes to mind for me is Whitney Wolfe Herd. You may or may not be aware of who she is. She was one of the co-founders of Tinder, and eventually she found herself filing a lawsuit against the company for harassment and discrimination. And in the midst of that turmoil, she was able to create something pretty significant out of it. She was able to start a new chapter creating Bumble, which is a competitor to Tinder. And one of the key aspects of Bumble is that women make the first move. And Bumble also evolved into other platforms such as Bumble BFF and Bumble Biz. And on Bumble Biz, which is mixed gender, women also have to make the first move on that platform. And this was all a really successful venture for Whitney because by the age of 31 in 2021, she became the youngest self-made billionaire. So obviously this story of being a woman is really significant in that case. It makes a lot of sense to highlight that as a part of her personal brand. But for the majority, this may not be as relevant. So let's talk about my tips for personal branding for women. Tip number 1 is achievements over labels. The research shows that men are better at selling themselves than women. So as women, we need to be better at understanding the value that we bring to the organization that we work for or our marketplace. We need to be better at understanding our skills, our achievements, the highlights of our career, and how we can highlight our qualifications for particular roles. Picture, for example, if you have 2 resumes or 2 bios of a service provider, and you have one that is brimming with skills, highlights, achievements, qualifications, and experience that shows the value that you have to offer to your employer or to a potential customer. But you have one that is more focused on the identity of being a woman. Which one do you think is going to be more successful in that scenario? Now, more likely it is going to be the one that is going to highlight the value that they bring to that experience, to that relationship. And that is because we generally look for a return on investment. We look for what is going to provide the value back to us that we are putting into a relationship. And that's not to say that you can't integrate personal messaging into your brand. This is something that I advocate for a lot because it has a lot of benefits. But it is making sure that when you are integrating personal messaging into your brand, that it is relevant to the context. It's relevant to your audience. It's something that adds value to the scenario in which you are communicating what those personal aspects of your messaging is. So just try and keep that in mind when it comes to positioning your personal brand and whether being a woman is an aspect of that or not. And also just a caveat about when it comes to selling yourself. Unfortunately for women, research also shows that when we celebrate our success too much, this is often seen in a negative light. So, as women, we need to be a little bit more careful about how we package up, how we celebrate our success. And I generally think that this doesn't need to be something that feels manipulative when you are trying to integrate humility and modesty into your communications. I kind of just feel like this is something that people are naturally drawn towards anyway, instead of people who just seem to shout their achievements from the rooftop, no matter what gender they are. I think we appreciate the person that has the degree of humility in what they are communicating. And the way that you can focus not just solely on the achievement is by telling the story behind that achievement. Who were the people that helped you to get there? Who were the people that were a part of that project? What did you learn from that experience? So instead of only focusing on the success, how are you telling a bigger story? My tip number 2 is personal but relevant. I think it is totally fine if you want to communicate about being a woman, but again, try and make it relevant to your audience, make it relevant to your work, why you are communicating this aspect of being a woman. And something that I would just be cautious about as well is that sometimes I feel like with all of the conversation about women in the workplace is that this can often be communicated in a way where people can talk negatively about their current workplace or people that they have worked for. And this is just something that I would personally be a little bit cautious about, because a future recruiter, for example, may look at that and not necessarily appreciate if you have spoken ill of your previous workplaces, because they don't want to be that person. That's just generally a rule of thumb when it comes to recruiting, is that it never looks great when a potential candidate is speaking negatively about the other places that they have worked for. Because in the end, everyone wants to be able to protect their own brand as well. Tip number 3 is to close the confidence gap first. I know that there is often a lot of discussion around the pay gap when it comes to the workforce, but men are generally perceived as being more confident. And whether this is true or not, they certainly do seem to be better overall at signaling their confidence. Sheryl Sandberg, in her book Lean In, which I know is very popular for working women, says, "Fear is the root of so many of the barriers women face. Fear of making the wrong choice, fear of drawing negative attention, fear of overreaching, fear of being judged, fear of failure, and the Holy Trinity, fear of being a bad mother, wife, daughter." When it comes to men, I don't think that it is that they aren't feeling the fear. I think that they potentially feel the fear but choose to act anyway. So how as women can we choose to act anyway when we are potentially feeling that fear? And I know that there is, thanks to figures like Brene Brown, a lot of conversation about vulnerability in the workplace. And I do think that there is a lot of merit in what is discussed as an aspect of that. But I also personally would be a little bit cautious about too much vulnerability in the workplace, especially in those more senior leader positions, because when you think about what you are looking for from people in the top job, yes, you are looking for them to be relatable. You're looking for someone that you can connect with. But when you think about the people that you want steering your business, leading you into battle, protecting you in the marketplace, when you have a confident leader, that instills confidence in the rest of the team and in the rest of the organization. So that's just something that I would personally be a little bit wary about, is how far you take that vulnerability conversation and how much you integrate that into your communication. My tip number 4 is to ask for the raise. The research shows that men are more likely to negotiate their salaries. So, for women, if this is you and you aren't someone who normally puts yourself forward when it comes to pay rises or promotional opportunities, then I guess I would just remind you that you fail at 100% of the things that you don't try, and that you have nothing to lose by just asking the question and putting yourself out there. In my experience in my own corporate career, with my own teams that I have managed and in negotiating my own salaries, I have found that even if something isn't immediately achievable, it sets that into motion. You can continue to have that conversation, or you have at the very least made your intention and your goal clear so that your superiors are aware of what it is that you are expecting as a part of the relationship in exchange for the value that you bring to the organization, which is a key aspect. You don't just want to be asking for the pay rise, you want to make sure that you are able to demonstrate your value or the value that you have the potential to bring. And that's where it goes back to being really clear about understanding what your achievements are, your skills are, and the impact that you have been able to have in your work. And admittedly, in some instances, this isn't always going to go as you hoped. And if you do find yourself in a situation where you are asking for a pay rise and you haven't been able to be successful in that, and you are sure that you have been able to provide value that deserves that pay rise, then it may be time for you to consider what your other options are. Which leads me to tip number 5, which is to take risks for rewards. Research shows that men generally take more risks, especially in high stakes and competitive environments. So, as a woman, remind yourself that you may be a little bit more risk averse than your male counterpart. So, how can you make an effort to take more risks? And understand that not all risks pay off. There are going to be risks that you take that don't work out for you, but in order to be able to achieve those bigger rewards, often that comes with a level of risk that you do need to take. And taking risks in general displays a level of innovation, of entrepreneurship, of confidence that are always going to be great leadership attributes as well. And my tip number 6 is to apply anyway. There was a study that found that men will apply for a job if they look at the job and they feel that they meet 60% of the criteria that is required in that role. And women apply if they meet 100% of the criteria. So again, for men, this comes back to risk-taking, confidence, putting themselves out there to sell themselves on what they know they have 60% of, with women potentially not taking that same risk. So when you see a job that you like and you feel really confident that you can achieve the core aspects of the role, make sure that you apply anyway. Because often a job ad or a job description is a wish list for the organization, for the manager. They have taken that opportunity to detail everything that they would like in the role if the absolute ideal candidate that could tick every box existed. But a lot of the time, this unicorn doesn't necessarily exist, and there will be aspects of that job description that not everyone is going to be able to meet. And if you haven't put your hat in the ring to be able to have that opportunity or to have that conversation in an interview, then that is an opportunity that you're never going to get if you didn't try. So make sure that you are applying anyway, because some aspects of that role may be easily negotiable. Yes, as a woman, you might find that there are more men in leadership positions, but it could be that they are taking the risk to get them. They are putting themselves out there confidently and they are selling themselves. For more on personal branding, subscribe to this channel and I'll see you in the next episode.